A sudden, chilling knock on Christmas night 1996. 6-year-old JonBenét Ramsey was reported missing from her family's Boulder home. A 2.5-page ransom note was found on the stairs, and hours later her body was discovered in the basement. The case exploded into a storm of suspicion, conspiracy, and endless headlines, and nearly 3 decades later, every new hint of progress pulls the public back in. If this kind of deep, ongoing mystery draws you in, hit that subscribe button now and turn on the bell so you don't miss any updates we bring you on this story and others. From the moment the news broke, a Christmas ransom note, frantic calls to police, and the horrifying discovery of JonBenét's body, the Ramsey case became a cultural Rorschach test. People projected theories, networks of armchair detectives formed, and journalists and investigators chased leads that often contradicted one another. The basic facts are stark and heartbreaking. The little girl vanished on December 25, 1996. A handwritten ransom note demanding $118,000 was left in the home, and JonBenét's body was found later that day in the household basement. Those details have anchored every subsequent theory, every documentary, and every renewed plea for answers. What has kept this case in the public imagination, besides the horror of the crime itself, is the absence of a clean, definitive resolution. Over the years, the investigation has seen dramatic turns, early missteps at the crime scene, intense media scrutiny on the family, and later forensic developments that both opened and complicated avenues of inquiry. That swirl of controversy has generated not just questions about who did it, but how the case was handled, and whether institutional errors helped bury the truth or simply delayed it. Newspapers, true crime series, and internet sleuths have kept theories alive, and each new documentary or book re-energizes public debate. Now, in the midst of that long conversation, an official note of renewed focus from Boulder authorities has reignited hope. City and police statements and local reporting make clear the investigation remains active and that DNA evidence continues to be reviewed as testing technology evolves. Those announcements don't mean a breakthrough is imminent, but they do mark a shift from frozen history to forward motion. Investigators have emphasized they are continuing to examine evidence with fresh tools, and the family has publicly pushed for modern techniques to be applied. The tone from law enforcement, measured, cautious, and often defensive against criticism, reflects the tightrope they walk, balancing transparency with the need to protect an active investigation. When JonBenet was killed, DNA science was in a different era. The tests law enforcement used then were robust for their time but limited. They relied on methods that needed fairly clean and abundant genetic material. Over the intervening decades, molecular biology has undergone a quiet revolution. Today's forensic labs have tools that can isolate tiny fragments of DNA from highly degraded or mixed samples, reconstruct partial profiles, and, crucially, feed that information into genealogical analyses that can point to living relatives of an unknown source. One important shift is the rise of next-generation sequencing and targeted SNP analysis. Modern sequencing can read millions of short DNA segments at once, making it possible to recover information from samples that would have failed older tests. Equally transformative has been investigative genetic genealogy, the method that combines DNA markers with family tree research to build likely relationships between an unknown DNA source and people who have uploaded their DNA to public genealogy databases. IgG helps solve several high-profile cold cases and has since been used to close many others. For cases with mixed or low-quantity DNA, such as trace material found on clothing or ligatures, modern lab work can separate contributors or enrich for human DNA in a way that was not feasible in the 1990s. In the JonBenet case, investigators have repeatedly referenced a foreign male DNA profile identified years ago in evidence such as underwear and other items. Early testing indicated DNA from someone other than the family was present. What was limited then was the laboratory capacity to parse that mixed DNA and build a usable profile from it. Contemporary techniques, however, can sometimes tease apart overlapped profiles, extract the non-victim component, and create a partial SNP profile suitable for genealogy work. If a high-quality profile is generated, genealogists can search for distant relatives and construct family trees that narrow the pool of possible suspects. That doesn't automatically deliver an arrest. It yields investigative leads that must be followed by traditional detective work, but in many cold cases it has been the turning point. Of course, laboratories must first securely extract and preserve any remaining evidence, control for contamination, and document chain of custody, especially in a case that has been handled and rehandled over decades. Some items from the Ramsey investigation were tested with earlier technologies and may be degraded or tainted by handling, which complicates analysis. Still, labs now use methods that enrich human DNA over background environmental DNA, and they can target tiny fragments left on ligatures, fingernails, or fabric. There's also an important legal and ethical overlay. Investigators must consider privacy rules for genealogy databases, legal standards for evidence, and court admissibility when using IgG. But purely on the technical front, the capacity for a modern lab to extract more information than was possible in 1996 is real, and that is why fresh testing has become synonymous with fresh hope. If the re-examination of DNA in the JonBenet case actually produces a match that points to an identifiable person, the legal machinery would begin turning quickly, but not instantly. A robust genetic lead leads to targeted investigation, subpoenas or warrants to collect reference DNA, confirmation testing to ensure the match is reliable, and careful development of corroborating evidence. An identification based on genetic genealogy is typically followed by classic police work, verifying alibis, tracing the suspect's movements, and locating physical or electronic evidence that ties them to the crime. Only after investigators gather sufficient probable cause would arrests be sought. In some jurisdictions, this might lead to grand jury proceedings before charges are filed. The legal path is strict because forensic genealogy leads are susceptible to error if not handled carefully. For the Ramsey family and the Boulder community, a confirmed identification would be seismic. JonBenet's death has been a wound measured in decades, anniversaries, renewed documentaries, and endless speculation. A validated suspect, or a formal exoneration of those previously suspected, would reshape both public perception and private grief. For the family, answers could bring an end to decades of public scrutiny and rumors. For the community, it could offer a measure of restored faith in local institutions. That emotional weight is part of why this case has never receded from public attention. When the legal system either proves someone responsible or clears those long suspected, the narrative shifts from rumor to resolution.
Societally, a breakthrough in a case this old would underscore two things. First, that cold cases can be solved with persistence and better tools. Second, that the justice system's promise to pursue truth even after years has tangible value. High-profile successes can encourage funding for cold case units and investment in forensic capacity. Conversely, a misstep, a rushed arrest based on weak genealogy work or poor courtroom preparation, could fuel skepticism and legal challenges that set back the broader use of these techniques. So the stakes are both intensely human and institutionally significant. Law enforcement and prosecutors know that any claim of identification in a case with such public scrutiny will be examined under a harsh light. To understand where we are now, you have to look back at where things went sideways. Early on, the crime scene was not preserved the way modern homicide scenes are typically handled. Multiple people walked through the house. Certain items were moved, and those early decisions complicated later forensic work. The intense media scrutiny and the spotlight on the family further polarized opinions and, at times, distorted investigative priorities. Critics argue those initial missteps scattered evidence and opened the door to contamination, while defenders of the investigation point to the complexity of balancing immediate rescue concerns with thorough evidence collection. Those early problems make laboratory work harder. DNA that might have been pristine in 1996 can now be fragmented, mixed, or present in vanishingly small quantities. Furthermore, as evidence is retested, analysts must rule out contamination by later handlers and be hyper-transparent about what they can and cannot conclude. That's why many experts warn against overselling what DNA can do. It can point and it can exclude, but it rarely tells a complete story without context. Still, the future pathway is clearer than it once was. Labs can apply next-generation sequencing, targeted enrichment, and improved bioinformatics to ancient or degraded samples. And investigators can partner with accredited genealogy firms that operate under clear legal frameworks. Combining these methods with traditional detective work, witness interviews, travel histories, phone records, and corroborating physical evidence creates a multi-pronged approach. Even if a single piece of DNA does not directly identify a culprit, it can eliminate suspects and narrow investigative fields in ways that were impossible before. This incremental pressure can expose inconsistencies, produce new witnesses, or reveal previously overlooked records. There's also a procedural lesson. Modern cold case workflows emphasize documentation, chain of custody, and independent verification so that when a match is presented, it survives both scientific scrutiny and courtroom challenges. The Ramsey case, with its high profile and complicated history, will demand nothing less. As of now, officials say the DNA re-examination is ongoing and results are pending. That status, neither nothing nor everything, is maddening to the public, but it reflects the reality of careful science and law. Laboratories must validate methods, exclude contamination, and produce evidence that can be presented in court if necessary. Investigators must follow leads generated by any genetic work and corroborate them with independent proof. That process takes time, and in some cases the only outcome is the elimination of lines of inquiry rather than a flashy arrest. For those who have followed JonBenet's story closely, the weight feels personal. For new audiences, the case reads like a textbook in how cold cases live on. A mix of tragedy, human error, and the slow accumulation of better tools. Whatever the next announcement brings, whether a tentative lead, a conclusive match, or a statement that no usable profile was recovered, the implications will ripple far beyond Boulder. A resolution would bring closure to a family and validation to decades of persistent work. A non-result would remind us how fragile evidence can be and how patient the search for truth sometimes must remain. The weight of nearly 30 years of expectation sits on this moment. The possibility of finally putting facts where there has long been only speculation. If you want first-hand updates and clear summaries as new information becomes available, don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell, because when this story moves, we'll bring you the facts carefully and completely.